Hollywood loves to rewrite history. A movie bombs once, and forever it's stamped as a disaster. But what if that flop was secretly brilliant? The 1980s gave us more than neon hair and arcade cabinets. It gave us some of the boldest science fiction ever put to screen. Yet many of them crashed harder than a failed space launch. Which 80s misfires were quietly revolutionary, waiting decades to be appreciated? Let's take a journey back to find out. Starman, 1984. John Carpenter had just delivered The Thing, and Hollywood wasn't ready for more bleak sci-fi. Horror. So he pivoted and gave audiences something gentler. Starman. It told the story of an alien who takes the form of a grieving woman's late husband, leading to a road trip across America filled with wonder, danger, and unexpected tenderness. With a $24 million budget, it made only $28 million domestically, hardly the blockbuster studios wanted. Part of the problem: marketing didn't know what to do with it. Too romantic to sell as a standard sci-fi, too alien-heavy to sell as a romance. The film landed in the cracks between genres, but Carpenter delivered something audiences didn't expect: sincerity. Jeff Bridges' performance as the alien learning to be human was so good, it earned him an Academy Award nomination. Karen Allen gave the film its heart, grounding the outlandish premise with real emotional weight. Critics admired it, but mainstream audiences stayed away, leaving it to quietly fade. Over the years, Starman became recognized as one of Carpenter's best. It's a rare sci-fi film that balances cosmic scale with emotional intimacy. Not about explosions or monsters, but about love, loss, and second chances. In a decade of loud blockbusters, Starman whispered, and that whisper still lingers. The Thing, 1982. If E.T. made you want to hug an alien, John Carpenter's The Thing made you want to burn one alive. Released in the very same summer, Spielberg's cuddly extraterrestrial conquered the box office. The Thing was the complete opposite: bleak, bloody, and unrelenting. With a $15 million budget, it managed only $19 million worldwide. Critics at the time tore it apart, calling it repulsive and hopelessly grim. Audiences didn't want paranoia, they wanted comfort. Carpenter gave them the exact opposite. A group of scientists trapped in Antarctica face a shape-shifting alien that can mimic anyone. Trust evaporates, alliances crumble, and the gore effects by Rob Bottin pushed cinema into grotesque new territory. Heads split, bodies twist, and suspicion eats away faster than the cold. What critics saw as excessive was actually artistry. Carpenter's slow-burn tension, matched with Ennio Morricone's unsettling score, created one of the most claustrophobic atmospheres ever filmed. And those practical effects? They remain unmatched. As years passed, the tide turned. On home video and later critical reappraisals, The Thing transformed from trash to treasure. Modern audiences see it for what it is: a perfect blend of paranoia and horror, where every glance is a question of survival. It has inspired everything from The X-Files to Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. At release, it was branded ugly. Today, it's a masterpiece, proof that sometimes you're just in the wrong decade. Tron, 1982. Imagine watching a movie in 1982 where characters are literally sucked into a computer world. For audiences raised on Atari and Pong, Disney's Tron was incomprehensible. With its groundbreaking CGI, glowing light cycles, and a story about a programmer battling inside a digital landscape, it was light years ahead of its time. Yet with a budget of $17 million, it only pulled in about $33 million, a modest return that disappointed Disney. The visuals were too strange for some, the story too abstract. Critics dismissed it as a flashy arcade demo masquerading as a film. And maybe that's why Tron languished, overshadowed by simpler crowd pleasers. But history has been kinder. Tron wasn't a gimmick, it was a prophecy. Its digital landscapes laid the groundwork for CGI blockbusters. Designers, animators, and game developers still cite it as a primary influence. What was once called cold and lifeless is now admired for its bold imagination. The irony? Tron's failure actually pushed Disney into caution, leading them to avoid risky projects for years. Yet the cult following grew, inspiring video games, a sequel, and endless pop culture references. Sometimes the world laughs at the future. Then, decades later, it realizes the joke was on them. Flash Gordon, 1980. Camp, color, and Queen on the soundtrack. How could Flash Gordon fail? Released in 1980, it had everything you'd want in a wild space fantasy. But critics didn't get the joke, and audiences weren't ready for a comic strip brought to life with such unapologetic flamboyance. Costing $20 million, it earned a disappointing $27 million in the US. The plot: straightforward pulp. A football player turned galactic hero battles Ming the Merciless to save Earth. But the presentation? Pure chaos. From kaleidoscopic costumes to bombastic set design, the movie leaned into camp harder than anything else that decade, and that soundtrack, Queen's operatic rock score, pushed it into surreal territory. Yet instead of being embraced, it was mocked. Viewers expecting Star Wars got a Technicolor fever dream. Decades later, that very excess is why it thrives. Flash Gordon has become a cult sensation, celebrated for its fearless weirdness and quotable lines. Even Ted, the comedy about a talking teddy bear, made it a centerpiece gag, proving its pop culture immortality. At release, it was a box office shrug. Today, it's beloved proof that sometimes the gaudiest rockets fly the farthest in memory. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, Across the Eighth Dimension, 1984. What do you get when you mix a rock star, neurosurgeon, physicist, and adventurer fighting aliens from another dimension? A box office disaster. Buckaroo Banzai cost about $17 million and earned a meager $6.3 million. Audiences in 1984 had no idea what they were walking into, and honestly, who could blame them? The movie doesn't explain itself, it just drops you in mid-story. Peter Weller plays Buckaroo, a Renaissance man with a team of eccentric sidekicks who battle extra-dimensional invaders. The plot zigzags between deadpan comedy, pulp adventure, and surreal sci-fi without ever slowing down to explain a thing. Critics were baffled, audiences bewildered. The studio didn't know how to market it, and the promised sequel, Buckaroo Banzai vs. the World Crime League, never happened. But here's the twist: that confusion is its genius. Fans who stuck with it realized they'd discovered something unlike anything else. Its quotable lines, offbeat charm, and fearless originality turned it into a cult legend. Today, Buckaroo Banzai is treasured precisely because it refused to fit into a neat box. What bombed in 1984 became a badge of honor for sci-fi fans who craved something truly strange. Dune, 1984. Some movies are doomed the moment they're greenlit. David Lynch's Dune was one of them. Adapted from Frank Herbert's sprawling sci-fi novel, it was supposed to be the next Star Wars. Instead, it was a box office meltdown. With a $40 million budget, it earned just $30 million in the US. Critics shredded it, calling it incomprehensible and lifeless. Audiences walked out confused, and Universal quietly buried it. But here's the thing: Dune wasn't bad. It was too much. Lynch tried to compress a massive, detail-rich book into 2 hours, and the result was like Cliff Notes on hyperspeed. The political intrigue, the spice wars, the mysticism jammed together so tightly that casual viewers couldn't keep up. Studio meddling didn't help, chopping the film down and adding awkward voiceovers to explain the dense plot. Yet over time, Dune earned a reputation as a flawed gem. The production design was jaw-dropping, from the grotesque Harkonnen palaces to the haunting sandworm sequences. Its dreamlike tone gave it a surreal atmosphere unlike any other sci-fi film of the era. Kyle MacLachlan's Paul Atreides, Sting's bizarre villain, and Lynch's offbeat direction made it unforgettable. Today, it's seen as a cult favorite, messy, ambitious, and undeniably unique. Denis Villeneuve's modern Dune adaptations owe their existence to Lynch's bold failure, proving that sometimes a flop can be the first step toward legend. Blade Runner, 1982. Sometimes, failure is just the world arriving too early. When Ridley Scott's Blade Runner hit theaters in 1982, expectations were sky high. Harrison Ford was hot off Raiders of the Lost Ark, Scott was coming off Alien, and the source material, Philip K. Dick's Do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, promised an electrifying dystopia. Instead of a box office juggernaut, audiences got a brooding detective story drenched in neon rain. With a $30 million budget, it barely scraped past $41 million worldwide. The problem? It wasn't the sci-fi audiences were trained to expect. There were no laser gun battles or quippy space heroes. Instead, they got philosophical questions about humanity, morality, and what it means to live. To make matters worse, studio interference added a clumsy voiceover Ford reportedly loathed, plus a happy ending grafted onto the final reel. Critics were divided, some praising the visuals, others dismissing it as lifeless. But time has a funny way of reshuffling the deck. Director's cut and final cut versions stripped away the compromises, letting Scott's bleak masterpiece breathe. Suddenly, its fog-choked skyscrapers and morally complex replicants weren't confusing. They were visionary. It inspired everything from The Matrix to Ghost in the Shell. Today, it's taught in film schools, dissected in essays, and endlessly referenced. In 1982, it was a disappointment. Today, it's the gold standard of cyberpunk. Sometimes you just need decades to recognize the future staring you in the face. Enemy Mine, 1985. By 1985, audiences wanted spectacle. What they got with Enemy Mine was something stranger. A survival story about enemies who become friends. Dennis Quaid played a human pilot stranded on a hostile planet. Louis Gossett Jr., under heavy makeup, played the alien he's sworn to kill. Together, they're forced to survive. The concept was powerful, but the execution was rocky. The production was a nightmare. Director Wolfgang Petersen stepped in after the original version was scrapped, ballooning the budget to $40 million. The film only earned about $13 million in the US, a catastrophic loss. Critics were unimpressed, calling it slow and overly sentimental. But time changed the verdict. Enemy Mine wasn't about flashy dogfights or galactic wars, it was about empathy. The scenes of the two learning each other's language, culture, and eventually raising a child together hit harder as decades passed. Gossett Jr.'s performance in particular gave depth and dignity to what could have been a one-note alien role. Today, Enemy Mine is celebrated as a sci-fi parable about understanding across divides. What audiences once shrugged off as preachy now feels ahead of its time. In the 80s, it was too soft. In hindsight, it was just right. Lifeforce, 1985. Space Vampires. That's the elevator pitch for Tobe Hooper's Lifeforce. Released in 1985 by Cannon Films, it had a $25 million budget and made only about $11 million in the US. What was supposed to be a wild sci-fi spectacle became a financial disaster. But here's the thing, Lifeforce is unforgettable. From its opening scenes aboard a mysterious alien ship to its apocalyptic climax in London, the film swings for the fences. Hooper, fresh off Poltergeist and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, combined gothic horror with sci-fi ambition. Critics didn't know what to make of it, dismissing it as chaotic nonsense. Yet fans found something special. The practical effects were jaw-dropping, the atmosphere eerie, and the sheer audacity of mixing vampiric myth with alien invasion was unlike anything else in theaters. It felt like a fever dream disguised as a blockbuster. Over the years, Lifeforce became a cult favorite. Horror buffs praised its bold visuals, while sci-fi fans admired its sheer originality. What bombed in '85 is now remembered as Cannon Films' most ambitious gamble. A weird, wild ride that refused to play it safe. Spacehunter. Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. If you wanted campy sci-fi adventure in 3D, Columbia Pictures thought they had a hit with Spacehunter. Released in 1983, it promised thrills, lasers, and space scavengers. But despite a massive marketing push, it grossed only about $16 million against its $14 million budget. Not a flop on paper, but far below what the studio hoped for, especially with 3D ticket premiums. The story followed Wolf, a rugged adventurer, as he tries to rescue 3 women from a villain named Overdog, played with grotesque glee by Michael Ironside. It was part Mad Max, part Star Wars, and part Saturday matinee serial. Unfortunately, audiences weren't buying it. Critics trashed it as cheap, derivative, and shallow. But let's be honest, that's exactly why fans love it now. The over-the-top sets, the cheesy one-liners, and the unapologetic pulp energy make it irresistible. Molly Ringwald, years before The Breakfast Club, brought spunky charm to her role as Wolf's young sidekick, giving the film an unexpected jolt of personality. Over time, Spacehunter became one of those movies you stumble upon late at night and wonder how you've never seen it before. It's not high art, but it's high fun. What failed to thrill 80s audiences now stands as proof that sometimes the cheesiest space junk shines the brightest in hindsight. Battle Beyond the Stars, 1980. When Roger Corman decides to make a Star Wars-style epic, you know it won't be ordinary. Battle Beyond the Stars was his ambitious space opera, borrowing the blueprint of the Magnificent Seven but setting it among the stars. With a budget of $2 million, huge for Corman standards, it ballooned to $8 million and barely made its money back. Critics panned it as a cheap imitation, and audiences ignored it. But what they missed was history in the making. This was the film that launched the careers of James Cameron and James Horner. Cameron worked on the groundbreaking special effects and model design, while Horner composed a sweeping score that later echoed in Star Trek films. For a so-called cheap knockoff, the craftsmanship was anything but cheap. The story follows a young farmer who recruits a ragtag group of mercenaries to defend his planet from a ruthless warlord. Sound familiar? Yes, but with a B-movie twist. Each mercenary had quirks, bizarre alien designs, and practical effects that pushed low-budget sci-fi to its limits. Over time, Battle Beyond the Stars became a cult classic. Sci-fi fans reappraised it as a scrappy underdog that dared to dream big. What was mocked in 1980 is now celebrated as proof that even in the shadow of Star Wars, creativity could shine on a shoestring. Howard the Duck, 1986. When George Lucas presents a movie about a wisecracking alien duck stranded on Earth, you expect either genius or disaster. In 1986, audiences got the latter, or so it seemed. With a staggering $37 million budget, Howard the Duck earned only $38 million worldwide and was widely labeled one of the worst films of the decade. Critics tore it apart for its bizarre premise, awkward humor, and tonal whiplash. It became a punchline, overshadowing the fact that it was actually groundbreaking in some ways. The animatronics for Howard were advanced for the era, and the film blended comic book absurdity with a level of ambition that few others dared attempt. Over the years, fans began to see Howard the Duck differently. Its sheer weirdness became its strength. The movie leaned so hard into absurdity that it circled back to being memorable. Leah Thompson's committed performance, the elaborate sets, and the unapologetic goofiness gave it a cult following. Today, it's not seen as a disaster, but as an oddball experiment. Flawed, sure, but unique. Marvel even brought Howard back for cameos in modern films, proving that what was once ridiculed has found its way back into the spotlight. Sometimes, the weirdest ducks really do swim again. The Last Starfighter, 1984. Imagine if your favorite arcade game turned out to be a recruitment test for intergalactic war. That was the hook of The Last Starfighter. With a budget of $15 million, it made only $29 million domestically. Disappointing, Universal. Critics shrugged it off, and audiences largely missed it. But what made it special wasn't the story, it was the technology. The Last Starfighter was one of the first films to use computer-generated imagery for its space battles. At the time, it looked futuristic. Critics dismissed the visuals as clunky, but they were seeing the dawn of digital effects that would later define Hollywood. The plot follows Alex Rogan, a small-town teenager who beats a video game, only to discover it was actually a test run by aliens to find real pilots. Suddenly, he's thrust into a galactic conflict, learning heroism on the fly. It's cheesy, yes, but undeniably charming. As years passed, its pioneering CGI gained respect. What looked odd in 1984 became admired as groundbreaking. The film built a loyal fan base who recognized its influence, and whispers of a sequel or reboot never seemed to die. At release, it was dismissed. Today, it's remembered as the moment cinema plugged directly into the future. Invaders from Mars, 1986. Tobe Hooper had already delivered Poltergeist and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So when he remade the 1953 cult sci-fi Invaders from Mars, expectations were high. The result? A colorful, surreal alien invasion film that critics and audiences rejected. With a $12 million budget, it earned just over $4 million, a total wipeout. The story follows a boy who discovers aliens infiltrating his small town, controlling adults through implants. On paper, it was classic 50s paranoia updated for the 80s, but Hooper took it in a different direction, campy, dreamlike, and deliberately exaggerated. Critics hated it, calling it childish and incoherent. Yet its strange qualities became the very reason it survived. The production design, with its oversized sets and eerie lighting, gave it a nightmarish fairy tale quality. The alien effects, though rubbery by modern standards, carried a bizarre charm. Today, Invaders from Mars is reevaluated as a cult oddity. It's not about realism, it's about evoking the unsettling logic of a child's dream. What tanked in '86 now fascinates fans who appreciate its surreal boldness. Sometimes failure is just another word for being too weird too soon. Altered States 1980. Some movies feel less like films and more like hallucinations. Ken Russell's Altered States was one of those. Released in 1980, it told the story of a scientist experimenting with sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic states, leading him to physically regress to earlier stages of human evolution. With a $15 million budget, it made just $19 million worldwide, not enough to be considered a hit. Critics were divided. Some hailed it as daring, others dismissed it as pretentious. Audiences were baffled by its surreal visuals, grotesque transformations, and philosophical dialogue. It was too strange, too cerebral, and too unsettling for mainstream tastes. But that's exactly why it endures. Russell's direction combined nightmarish imagery with ambitious ideas, creating sequences that still shock today. William Hurt, in his film debut, delivered a raw performance that grounded the madness. Over time, Altered States found its place as one of the boldest American sci-fi films of the '80s. Its willingness to explore the limits of consciousness and identity set it apart from the space operas dominating the decade. What audiences once rejected as incomprehensible is now admired as fearless cinema. In 1980, it was too strange to succeed. In hindsight, it was brilliant. So, there you have it. 15 sci-fi flops from the '80s that bombed at the box office but exploded in legacy. They remind us that failure doesn't mean forgotten. Sometimes it means misunderstood. Which of these have you seen, and which are you now adding to your watch list? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with a movie fan, and subscribe for more deep dives. Because the past still has surprises waiting to be discovered.